Our next session is the Enterprise of the Future, Igniting Transformation and Growth. Please welcome Manuel Hinojosa, Customer Solutions and Innovation, KPMG Mexico. He is joined by Miguel Quiroga, SVP Platforms and Ecosystems, Verizon, Julio Hernandez, Global Customer and Operations Service Line Lead, KPMG, Jennifer López, Vice President of Product Development, Capital One, and Christina Cuarón, Managing Director, Core Technology Infrastructure Executive, Bank of America.
Looks like Julio's having a little bit of Zoom technology issues, but we can introduce ourselves. Excited to be here. Hi, Jennifer López from Capital One. I run the innovation lab there and some data products. I'm from New York City, Brooklyn specifically, and my father is Mexican and my mother's Puerto Rican. Miguel?
Hi, thank you so much, Jennifer. My name is Miguel Quiroga. I am Senior Vice President of Platform and Ecosystems at the Verizon Consumer Group, where I'm focused on building and executing a platform and product practice for the $100 billion business. I am actually based in the New York area, New Jersey specifically, and my background is my father is Bolivian and my mother is Chinese. Christina?
Thanks, Miguel. Hi, everybody. So excited to be here today. Christina Cuarón, Bank of America, Managing Director for Technology Infrastructure Executive. I am based in New York. I am originally Mexican from Mexico City. I grew up there. I've been at the bank for about 23 years. Just so excited to be here today. And I think we have Julio back, so I guess I'll hand it over to Julio.
All right, thank you very much. I'm assuming that all of you can hear me now. So we've been going through a little bit of technical issues, and after 2 years of the pandemic, we would think that that wouldn't be the case, but here we go. And I see a lot of smiles from my guests, which is fantastic. So we've had the privilege of hearing from them. And I just wanted to set a little bit of the context. So by way of background, I'm Julio Hernandez. And like my colleagues, I have a heritage of from Hispanic. My father's from Cuba originally. And I'm super excited to be part of HITEC. Today, we're going to be talking about the connected enterprise and really talking about how digital is transforming and the need for our businesses to transform. And when you read the synopsis for this discussion, it was really about enterprises are facing rapid change and disruption, and those disruptions are really putting pressure on their future viability, and companies are having to adapt. To stay ahead of competition, businesses are transforming the way that they harness new technologies and the way that they work. And they're really doing that to unlock new opportunities, to take advantage of opportunities in front of them as well. And so today we're going to talk with these esteemed speakers about what they're doing to make things happen in their enterprises and really talk about the opportunities that are in front of them, how they're addressing those opportunities, how they're navigating those opportunities, and the lessons that they've learned. So with that, I'm super excited to talk to them. In terms of context, KPMG has done research over the last 4 or 5 years in conjunction with Forrester around what a really high-performing business has in terms of capabilities. And specifically, they have 8 capabilities they look at across the enterprise that when put together actually generate much more positive economic returns. Not only profitable growth, but actually faster return on investment around those capabilities that they deploy. And those capabilities exist first and foremost around driving insight-driven strategy, so harnessing data to be able to engage with customers the right way, to be able to engage in the marketplace the right way. The second is around innovative products and services and taking those insights and really shaping the value proposition of the marketplace in a way that's innovative and always staying on the front foot. They think about experience centricity, and they don't just talk about customer experience. They talk about the employee experience. They talk about the experience of their ecosystem partners that are delivering on their proposition in the marketplace. They invest in seamless interactions and commerce. So they have the ability to basically blur marketing, sales, and service and do commerce with their customers, be that B2B or B2C or B2B2C. They really are thinking about that with that experience centricity mindset. In addition, they're thinking about the right operations to back up the proposition to their customers. So it's very much about a responsive supply chain, responsive operations. Clearly, you cannot do any business today without having the right culture, the right workforce, the right skill set. And so that's the sixth capability that companies are investing in. Clearly, because we're in high tech, you see that there's a need for the right technologies. And so that's an underpinning there. And then lastly, no company does it alone. And so how do you manage partners, and how do you really get to orchestrate that in the right way so that you can be able to really generate profitable growth in a world that's changing, in a world where technologies are making things happen in a different way? So with that, I'd like to start off with Jennifer. And Jennifer, I'm just curious, how do you bring a customer mindset to inform the decisions you're making about building the enterprise of the future?
Thank you. I love talking about this topic. I joined Capital One 9 years ago now as the first design strategist brought in to help us understand how do we make the customer the center of everything that we do. And I think a lot of the narrative is around the customer experience. So in a banking or a credit card scenario like Capital One, it would be the customer that's going to go grocery shopping that evening to bring home groceries for their family, or the person that's trying to find an auto loan for their auto car, right? Like those are often the description, and we need to think about those experiences for sure. But I've always said that we are not yet in a place in which everyone is producing products for robots. Yes, machine learning is everywhere, but the reality is every single product that you're building is for humans. So in the Innovation Lab in particular, we take that ethos to heart, and my team builds consumer-facing innovations all the time, but we also build internal tooling and infrastructure. So I make tools for our contact center and call center agents, our risk managers, our data scientists. And one of the things that I always like to talk about is when we're doing that, when I'm making a new tool for our risk management department or data scientists or whomever, the interface to that tool has got to be top-notch. There's no difference. A human's a human's a human. And if you're trying to think about how to imbue customer centricity into your DNA, you have to understand that. You have to believe that everything that you build, no matter if it's for an internal employee at your company or your end customer, whomever that might be, you have to treat every human with that same integrity, respect, and dedication. And I think that is one of the main things that we don't think about when we talk about customer centricity. If you don't have it in your DNA and you don't understand that every single thing that you're building has to be of that same caliber, you'll make decisions that are pretty poor, right? You'll say, oh, well, like that customer experience doesn't have to be top notch. It can be just enough. We can just get to MVP. And every time you make one of those decisions, you degrade your ability to deliver for the customer. So if you want to imbue it into your DNA, you have to ask yourselves, not only is the experience for your end customers great, but how are you treating your internal employees and internal users? Are you treating them just as well? Unless those bars are the same, it's really hard to maintain that high level.
So Jennifer, I mean, you really are talking a large extent about bringing those insights from what the customer needs and wants, but also this idea of experience centricity, of really thinking about the experience you want to deliver, but not just to the customer, but to the person who might be helping that customer, because they need to travel together. And I think we're seeing that thematic out in the marketplace, and leaders really taking that approach. So Miguel, same question to you. How does Verizon view this, and how do you bring that experience centricity and this customer centric mindset to an organization that's as first and as complex as yours?
It's a great question. I love the setup. I too, Jennifer, I think this is one of the most critical topics, particularly in this environment where software is more and more becoming a part of the fabric of what we do when we serve customers and help customers. The intersection of product engineering, design, I think is where the secret sauce is. And I think that's kind of the core of how we do things. But I think the first principle of saying you're going to be customer centric, whether it's customer experience, employee experience, partner experience, as a mechanism for driving growth, I think is the most important filtering mechanic that we have to have. And at Verizon, we try to push it through that process. there's a fiscal component, and you have to have a belief system that says, look, experience-driven choices actually turn into better financial outcomes. So that means you're going to make longer-term bets. So you're not going to run into just situations where you're going to have trade-off decisions where there's not just tech debt, but there's experiential debt. Right. And you have to decide if these are choices you're going to make. If we're focused on the consumer, we might make short-term decisions that may not make sense initially financially, but we believe will have an outsized outcome. And I think in Verizon's context, we think of that in two lenses. You could look at smaller early stage brands like when I was CEO of Visible, where we were basically trying to stand apart from other ecosystem players. You have to be very focused on experience because that's the differentiation point when no one knows who you are versus a brand like Verizon that has 150 million paying subscribers. It too sets the bar for what experience is supposed to be because it has such a large scale. So the goal from our perspective is we're trying to achieve experience as a mechanism to drive our decisions, but the outcome we want to achieve is actually business agility because by understanding our consumer, we think we can learn and adapt more quickly. And that way we're able to be more effective at our investments, more effective at our build capabilities, more effective at the talent acquisition we need to achieve the kind of goals we have to scale the businesses we're running.
That's fantastic. And what I love about that is you guys are really thinking about the experience. You're thinking about experience as a mechanism. You're thinking about experience as something that really becomes sticky, and that you can use it also to really guide the organization and hold up a mirror. So building on that thematic and sticking with you, Jennifer, how do you think about bringing technology and business together? How do you bring the IT organization, the business runners together? Because the lines are blurred. Even in some of the dialogue that we just had, you guys were very much talking about the blurring. But how do you bring them forward together?
I think this is such an important topic because in talking to my peers, whether it be at Capital One or other companies, there's often a tension, right? There's a tension between the business, the technology, add in product managers, add in designers, add in legal. Inevitably, there's some sort of power struggle. And I'd argue that happens everywhere. It doesn't matter if you're in a large organization, small organization. It doesn't matter if you're founder-led or not. And what I have found is that if you're going to build great experiences, as Miguel and I were talking about, you got to get rid of that stuff. And the only way you get rid of that stuff is if you find the commonalities. So what I've done with my teams is really encourage them to just understand their peers and their partners on a personal level first, on an objective and key result level second. So personal level, who are they? What drives them? Why are they excited to come to work every day? If you don't understand that, you actually don't understand how to engage with them day in and day out. You also don't know how to negotiate with them. When we're building products, it's a constant negotiation. So you have to understand the human that you're working with on the other side. And then you also have to understand where they're coming from a goal perspective, right? Many times what I've seen is a technology organization and a business, they have different goals and they don't know what they are. So all of a sudden the CTO has said X, we must reduce costs, we must do X, we must do Y. And then the business counterparts don't know that. So they're confused why these new decisions have been made, why they haven't been consulted. And if you have empathy in that scenario and you ask questions, you're like, hey, if I were that human and I was just being told I had to reduce costs by X or I had to funnel a bunch of my resources to do Y, I might make a similar decision. So instead of being siloed, ask a lot of questions so that way you can find the goals that are driving people's behaviors, because that's the other thing. These are humans. Their behaviors are driven by something. It's your duty to unpack what those things are. When you do that and you've built that personal relationship, oftentimes you can find that there is a common goal. Say, okay, so your organization needs us to do X. That's not a concern on my organization, but what if we did Y? What if we did this thing that solved both of our problems? And that's when you really can start understanding how you meet the common goals together. Through that activity, it sounds like a lot of work, a lot of overhead to understand these other humans, to understand their goals, to understand what's driving their decision making. But I guarantee you put that work up front, all of a sudden you have a super high functioning, trusting team. And you need trust. Again, everything's a negotiation when you're building software because inevitably there's a bunch of features that could be built, a bunch of cyber remediations probably that need to happen. There's all of this stuff. And you have to be able to negotiate your way through those decisions. I'll say on my team, when we've done this, and we go present, no one knows what job someone has. So no one can tell who's the engineer, who's the designer, who's the legal person on the team. And those are the days that I am most proud, because if you can't tell what job someone has and you just feel like the entire team has each other's back and answers all the questions, like that's the team I'm going to bet on. That's the team that's going to make it. The team where you can clearly tell what everyone's job is, those silos stand up real fast and they fall really fast too.
Right. And it's interesting. I just was going to tease that out for a moment. Then it looks like we've been joined by Manuel, which is fantastic. But one of the things I was going to ask is, do you see an acceleration as the team works more and more together? So, for instance, there's a lot of this storming, understanding each other's objectives. But what's the power of that? Is that a force multiplier? Does it just, what have you seen?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're trying to do is you're trying to build trust. If that trust is there on day one, you're like 3 months ahead. You're 6 months ahead. That is fairly magical. In my teams, we try really hard to make sure that on the localized team, people are very trusting. But then we also, every quarter, every 4 or 5 months, we force the entire teams to have a week. We call it Hack Week or Labs Week, or where we force them to make friends with new coworkers and do a project together, a very short sprint. But the whole perspective there is we want to short circuit how long it takes to get to trust. So normally it takes a little while because you're working on a team together. But in a hackathon team, when you're doing something really quickly, you can actually build trust fast. So that way, by the time they're on a real project together, they've worked together, they know each other, they've known what they're like under pressure. And any way that you can get your teams to build even small sparks of trust will be massive supporters of you and your project and your initiative moving forward, because trust is the thing that makes decisions poor, makes decisions long to actually create and execute against, and that's what kills a product.
That makes total sense, and having seen that in action, when it's there and when it's not, and you really want to be on the side of having it. Manuel, what would you add around this topic?
Well, I totally agree with Jennifer, and it is relevant because we did an analysis last year together in KPMG with Forrester, and 60% of leaders were probably in the same situation as everyone in this room, no? Dealing with digital or transformation or high-tech intensive projects. And this really shows the inertia, no, of actually working with IT. But I also believe that, at least in my experience, working from the consulting industry, there are a lot of organizations that actually fail, and they fail big in this initiative because they work also in silos, no? Jennifer was mentioning. And I think that one of the three things that are missing mostly in this project is a clear vision. No? Sometimes we just start to implement solutions, modules, technologies, either because they're trendy or because someone, a function with a lot of power, thought that was important to implement, but there's not a prioritized vision. There's not let's say, an end-to-end perspective. And it is important to have that from the beginning. It is also important to focus on people and business outcome. Technology, of course, is important, but technology alone is not the answer, no? And placing too much importance probably on the role of technology can be also a fact of barrier for success, no? And we've seen this because Jennifer was talking about the high performance teams. It's imperative to focus on people. These are the guys who are actually going to make this happen. And related to people, I think that we need also to decentralize the power. I've seen very hierarchical organizations, structures that make very difficult to introduce change. If they don't have this capability of actually asking questions, not being afraid of making suggestions. Decentralizing can help ensure also the rollout models and somehow embrace or simplify these new ways of working. So I totally agree with what you're saying, but I would add those 3 points into the discussion.
Well, Manuel, that's just a great segue to Christina, right? So Christina, as you work across the enterprises, and the functions. How do you think about setting the right vision and orchestrating the transformation to basically build the enterprise of the future? How do you do that?
Yeah, Julio, thanks so much for the question. It was a great segment from Manuel, or segue from Manuel. I mean, Jennifer talked about connecting the technology, the business, customer centricity, and Manuel started to touch on the people aspect. So, a couple of things here. First, when you're setting the vision, right, starting out with the strategy from the top of the house, right? Where is the organization going? What are the critical strategic objectives? What are you after? Is an obvious, but let's not forget, very important point. And then, from my vantage point, you start to get into, look, we manage the core technology infrastructure, the entire infrastructure backbone of the bank. And so we are part of an integrated ecosystem across global technology and the bank, right? Because ultimately, we need to enable the business to deliver for our customers. And so recognizing that also is a very, very key part of setting the right vision. Also important is to recognize that the workforce, the people, is just as important as setting the vision and the strategy for the technology. The tech transformation that we are experiencing just will not be successful without having the right workforce. And what this means is having the right people in the right roles with the right skill sets in the right locations to execute on that vision, and enabled, quite frankly, with agile, collaborative structures that allow you to attract and retain the top talent. So the orchestration here, Julio, is as much about the people and your underlying ways of working, if you will, as it is about orchestrating the underlying technology initiatives that you have going on. So what we're doing at Bank of America is again, putting as much focus on our workforce modernization efforts as we are on modernizing our technology and the infrastructure that runs the bank. And one more key point to also recognize is that, the war on talent that we're all experiencing, right? Unequivocally, right now, demand does not meet supply, and it won't, and it's just going to keep getting harder. And so there's an element here where you've got to put full attention on your workforce, and it's about upskilling and retention and building a young pipeline of talent, and making sure that we improve the work that is done and how it gets done. So the structure and the orchestrating of this, the way I think about it from a transformative perspective, almost gets organized from a people standpoint into four categories, right? One is about attracting the talent, right, at all levels of the organization. And then also enabling internal mobility. That's where you start to get fungible skill sets, and how do you make sure that you build and you create an opportunity for people to also have careers and development opportunities, right? Retention, obviously, modernizing your construct within which you retain folks, the opportunities you give them, the development aspect, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit more later today, but having and creating the right space, the right avenues, and providing the right level of development in the critical skills of the future is really important. And then last but not least, I think of it, the fourth area here of focus would be organizational effectiveness, right? And some of the operating models. And Jennifer, you touched on a number of things about connectivity and the teams and how do you operate, from my vantage point, where you have software developers versus infrastructure, and you start to think about, well, how does DevOps work together? How do you create that connectivity? I think that making sure that you have the right pathway to enable the organization to work well together across the board is a really, really important point. And the last thing I will touch on is that I think underlying these strategic pillars, when you think about people and what we need to do in parallel to developing the technology of the future, is the cultural element of it, right? And that is really about having a culture of continuous improvement and growth, right? Because you really do. You need to inspire a growth mindset, and you need to foster a culture of well-being and diversity and inclusion, and a space to fail and a space to innovate, and all of those fun topics that I'm sure you're all familiar with. So that's how I think about the vision and the orchestration of transformation, Julio.
Well, Christina, that's fantastic. And I'm going to come to Miguel in just a moment, but I want to tie a couple of thoughts about this people development issue in terms of preparing people to support the jobs of the future, right? So one thing that Manuel had said is he said, he sees it. He said it was very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult in very hierarchical organizations sometimes to get things to happen the way that you want them to happen, especially since you have so much that needs to be done. On the other hand, you just mentioned, Christina, about being agile and collaborative, and so that's a skill set you have to train. You have to teach people, right? And we had the opportunity to hear from Jennifer talking a lot about really building trust. So going to you, Miguel, how is Verizon thinking about the workforce of the future and how to prepare today's workers, be they in your four walls or coming into your four walls? How are you guys thinking about that? Because I clearly think everybody that's listening to us, and I can clearly say the five of us or the six of us, the five of us here, we all are in the talent game. But how is Verizon dealing with that?
It's a great question. I would echo the sentiment on the war for talent is very serious. One starting point that kind of shapes a lot of the thinking that I have and we have in this space is this idea that what we create is ultimately a function of who we are. And so that's why the diversity and inclusion is so critical. Like at the end of the day, the people, process, technology, ultimately the products we built are a function of people and humans who are essentially building the capabilities. And they represent people's kind of hearts and minds and the soul of what we do. So it's so important to start there, which starts with the culture and the culture we want to build. We're more and more embracing a product-centric dynamic towards how we think about building capabilities, which means that we become more modular and scalable. And so in order to do that, that's certainly retooling, reskilling the way we build things. But it's also the way we prioritize and invest. We're shifting the dynamics of our prioritization methodology. One of the functions within my group does that prioritization work. And even just simple questions of like, how do we invest for the short-term, long-term, and trade-offs allow us to be more long-term focused on experiential design and creating those capabilities. But that's about changing the conversation, right? Because what got us here won't get us there, particularly for more mature businesses like the Verizon core brand, versus newer businesses. These dynamics are a little different. For a more established business like Verizon, it's super important to continue to evolve our practices and the way we build. I think the other component in terms of the talent aspect is this idea of cross-functional domain expertise. I know for me personally, like when I'm hiring a marketer, because I'm sitting today on this current role, I'm on the business side. I'm looking for resources who have a product background. So I'd be looking for, say, a marketer who has a high acumen on data and data science, or engineers who have a high acumen on brand. And that cross-functional understanding is kind of the wave of the future. Jennifer, what you were talking about of like the blurred lines of what people bring to the table. That's what we're looking for now more and more when we hire. So that's what we're looking for, kind of active talent. So the secret sauce for us is, the really good place to be is where we have great new talent. We're ingesting from the outside market, paired up with seasoned talent who know the commercial dynamics of the telco industry. That's where we get great wins and great, kind of momentum in the work we do. And there's also the opportunity to reskill. Some of our best ideas come directly from our frontline employees. We've reskilled them and taught them, AI modeling, different practices to be more and more dynamic. And we think that's the way of the future. We also invest heavily in other programs, that are more society-based at Verizon as a whole. So we try to touch all aspects, whether it's the employee, the customer, or society as a whole, to kind of think about the way that capabilities and software we build for the future, because we think it's so important to kind of be part of that ecosystem.
Well, it's interesting, Miguel, as you talk about that, because you even yourself are an example of something that Christina spoke about, the mobility, being able to go from one part of the business to another part of the business. You said, hey, I'm on the business side now, right? Maybe next time I won't be on the business side. And so the point is that mobility to be able to go. So just, going back to you, Christina, I mean, what in particular is, Bank of America doing today to really, accelerate this workforce being prepared for the future?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak more specifically about the infrastructure organization. But once again, we are investing in our people, right? We need to recognize, and we do recognize that, quite frankly, when I think about workforce, I actually don't like to say workforce transformation. I prefer to say workforce modernization, because we have the workforce in place. It's just a matter of retaining and upskilling and organizing ourselves better, right? And so so there's a couple of things here that we're doing. One is there's a lot of change happening in the infrastructure space. And so at the very foundational level, I think it's important to recognize as well that technology organizations, such as the one I'm a part of, encompasses more than just technology experts, right? And so starting with the very basics to say, all right, our software development teams use agile methodology. So everybody should have a basic foundational understanding of what agile is. How does it work? How do our, CIOs and the business partners that we support from an infrastructure perspective operate, right? Because it creates that connectivity. It makes you think differently about what you do day in and day out, even if you're not a technologist. And it sort of grounds everyone at the foundational level, right? The other thing we're doing is, so we're doing more cloud adoption, right? And I think everybody's shifting more and more to hybrid cloud and such. And so it's really, again, important for us that we say, look, we are going to provide industry-recognized certification to our employees, right? We're going to make our workforce more marketable, and we're going to train you in the technologies that we are building for the future, because you are our future, right? And so those kinds of things and those kinds of strategies are really, really important in preparing our company and our workers for tomorrow's jobs. And one other thing I want to talk or touch on with regards to training and development is it's important to remember the 3 E's, right? The education element, the experience, and the exposure, they're all just as important, right? So starting with, establishing very clear and easy ways to get the training that you need, creating the time for it, supporting it, all of those things, right? But just as important to that is making sure that you are training folks, and then you can turn around and have the second E, which is the experience, right? Making sure they can apply those newly learned skills. Jennifer, you talked a little bit about sandboxes and labs and things like that, right? But so that's great as part of the training, but also making sure, again, that you are training the appropriate level at the expert level layers of the organization as well, and making sure that they can pivot and create that experience so that they can apply those newly learned skills. And then the third E, which is the exposure, right? And having an opportunity to expand the network. We were talking about hackathons and things like that. I think that just remembering those 3 E's are really, really important for us as an organization. And then last but not least, right, we talk about all of the tech skills and everything, but I want to come back to the cultural aspect. I think it's also really important that you offer training that focuses on the behavioral aspects of all of this, the culture-related training. We like to refer to that as the how versus the what. But I think it's just as important to remember that training in that context is a really long way with the transformation effort.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I love the 3 E's, the way that you frame that and share that, and I couldn't help but think about my own career and the progress that I've made to be able to kind of navigate that. And I think, when did I get the specific E's, and when did things seem to go great and when did they not, and how could I have an intervention? So we've been talking a lot about this war for talent. And our research also indicates that no one company can do everything themselves, right? There's just no way that you can do that, right? And so you have this opportunity to really leverage other parties, other partners, other ecosystem folks. So I'm just kind of curious, Jennifer, as you think about that, and also maybe just in the context of the battle for talent and the retention and all that and skills, how do you put those pieces together in your journey around transformation?
Yeah, I think actually understanding that no one company can do it all on its own is an important thing, because I've met so many folks that just think like, oh, we'll build it, we'll solve the problem. It's like, no. You have a massive workforce who could work anywhere. You want to make sure when they show up to work every day, their job is not easy, because no one actually wants an easy job. You want to be challenged, but is unblocked, unencumbered. And many times when your internal infrastructure and internal tooling doesn't work as well as it should, like it is a labor to go to work, because you know that what you're doing could be done 10 times faster if you had this other tool. You know that it could be so much easier and less painful if you had access to things. So many companies look at their, like, how do you actually partner, and think much more about like build-buy models. And I always say, well, there's build, there's buy, there's license, there's partner, right? Like making sure that you understand that anytime you encounter a problem, your thought should be, let's get the best for this thing, whether it's an internal infrastructure problem, whether it's a consumer-facing problem, whether it's a new business you want to engage in. But make sure you're thinking through the appropriate argument, right? Immediately jumping to like, we can solve this problem, we'll do it, may not be the right answer. You want to actually ask, who are the experts out there? Where can we learn the most from? Are we best suited to solve this problem by ourselves? Are we best suited to go buy an existent product out into the market? Are we best suited to buy a product and then customize it? Are we best suited to go actually partner with another organization that's doing this really, really well and tout that partnership, right? Because another piece to this experience we're having around the war on talent is many times you have people that interview and say, well, like, how do you do X? They want to vet out what their day-to-day is going to look like before they show up with that computer. So if you tell these stories of who you partner with and how you make your end customers' experience better, but also your employees' experience better, I think you have a much better standing in this war for talent. So yeah, it's not just build, it's not just buy, it's not just license, it's also partner. And then when you go after the partner side, you got to vet those folks. Right? Yeah. Every company has their own understanding of what their mission is, what their values and goals are. And as we're more interconnected, if you tout a partner that you're with, you better be comfortable with the actions that partner takes and making sure that you do that in advance. Yeah.
I think that's spot on. And I also think, just going back to something Christina said about not only the what and the how, but you also have this juxtaposition of basically confidence versus humility. You know, you want people who have confidence they can do everything, but you also want them to have the humility to say, maybe someone else should do it better than me, and therefore I can. And then you gain a lot of trust, which goes back to something that you spoke about earlier, Jennifer. So Miguel, how do you think about, basically an ecosystem?
Yeah, no, I think you said it well, because that humility component is super hard. I mean, on the one hand, it's a bit of a dichotomy. We want to get our teams to feel like they can conquer the world. On the other hand, we want to make sure that there's more than one path to get there. And I think in the ecosystem play, that we think about often, and that's some of the things that my team is particularly focused on, is how do we make ourselves, not just customer experience focused, not just employee experience focused, but also partner experience focused. How are we easiest to do business with? And there's a variety of components and thoughts on that, and I think so often businesses that are doing well, they think they can do it all. And I think this is kind of a bit of a slippery slope. We're trying more and more to think about how do we do what we do best and find others to essentially do what they do best. And we think about that in two domains. One is obviously the more traditional partnerships, but even getting more in a technology lens, is our business as API centric as it needs to be to unlock that type of partnership integration that can be done at a much higher velocity, much more seamlessly. So that's one aspect. The other component is, are we thinking about building things together more in a co-creation dynamic? So we often think about partnerships now more and more as there could be co-creation with all the way to the end consumer. We've done those type of bets where we've sat down with consumers and they've helped us build the next generation of the products and features, to actual partnerships where the outside company has better skill sets but has yet to build the capability that we both desire. So there's a way to essentially build a commercial contract where we're saying, look, you win because you're getting to build the capability you need to have on your roadmap from a technology perspective. We win because we get first rights of access to that capability. And we think that's just a better way to build, because we don't have to build it all, then we can still win. I think that's kind of a new way of thinking that's particularly for the larger businesses that I think is something that doesn't come easily. And we're really excited to kind of embrace that type of approach. It's all about the ecosystem, and it's a rising tide helps all ships kind of dynamic.
It's interesting. We started off the conversation talking about how do you bring this idea of customer-centric mindset, a growth mindset, right? 1 + 1 is 3 for our consumers, our customers, et cetera. And now we're talking about this whole ecosystem and working with others. It really is kind of a way of saying, I've got to build some new muscle, because it's not necessarily always been the way that we've done it. And there's clearly going to be we're going to have to learn new things. How do we manage IP in a different way when we do that, especially if we invest in it? How do we make sure that, they're delivering the service levels that actually impact my customer in the right way? Lots of dimensions of it, but it is, a new muscle that we're really having to build here to basically be able to transform our enterprise to engage with the marketplace, to drive growth, and make all the stakeholders that we're having to address a little bit happier. So as we turn the corner here and on the final stretch, I just wanted to ask a question, and I'm going to ask Manuel to respond first, and then I'm going to go around the horn here. But how do you think about transformation? So I've got this working hypothesis that transformation is no longer episodic; it's a continuous thing. And Manuel, I don't want to lead the witness, but how do you see that? And then I'm going to come to you, Christina, next.
Thank you, Julio. Yeah, I mean, we've seen, and we did also a study, and 43% of executives view transformation as an episodic or a short or middle-term initiative. That's a lot, no? 43%. And I guess that sometimes we do not realize that transformation is a process. It is not an event, no? It goes through different stages. Sometimes it takes years. It requires tons of hours and capabilities from different areas, not only technology. Let me put a parenthesis here, because I was impressed to see that more than 60%, almost 65% of initiatives are led by the CIO or by the IT areas, no? So this is, in my opinion, a mistake, no? But it goes through different stages. So we really need to define and communicate this and sensibilize all the organization, no? In terms of what it takes. We need to empower everyone, no? In order to make them part of this transformation. Yeah, but it is a process, and at the end, the challenge is that we need to institutionalize that change. No, it starts as a project, of course. It goes through different stages, but at the end, all these new approaches, all these new initiatives need to be part of the new DNA of the culture of the company, and there's the challenge. But that's part of the final deliverable that we need to consider as part of every initiative. No, that's probably something that we do not put in our work of statement, but that should be the final deliver. How do we translate into the operation and make it part of the date by day or to-do list? No.
Understood, Manuel. Thank you very much, Christina. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard it before, right? That the only thing that is constant is change. But quite frankly, look, with the pace of technology change, transformation, innovation, all of these things underway, change is happening every day at a pace that, quite frankly, I think outpaces our cognitive ability to keep up. And innovation, as an example, nowadays can be really thought of into three buckets. And the near term is more like 6 months, midterm is a year, and long term is anything 1.5 years and beyond. So the time frames of change have largely compressed over the decade. So this can be very daunting, right? So that's why we need to make sure that you bring everybody on board, right? You need to win the hearts and minds of your people. And you need to create a variety of avenues and incentives and offerings for employees for growth, right? Going back to the point about attracting, retaining that talent, upskilling that talent. You need to make sure that we have managers that are energetic and eager to truly lead our groups through change, which is hard. There's no question it's hard, but there's always, with change comes opportunity, right? And so just being super intentional about what we do with regards to managing our people and creating that right culture. We focus a lot on what we refer to as employee engagement and innovation, because again, that's how you bring people together. That's how you introduce new ways of working. Jennifer touched on hackathons. I think that's, again, something that it's a little bit of a competition. It's fast, it's agile. You get people creating their own teams. And so you create that connectivity back to your strategy, which again, because the change is so continuous and so rapidly moving, we have to make sure that people feel like they are part of that journey, right? That they really are changing along with it, and you have this continued sort of experience of being part of the change and enabling the change. So, and then last but not least, well, actually, I'll touch on two more things. Sharing success stories through this change is really important. It's almost like a grassroots effort of campaigning and sharing and communicating why the change is important and how people across the entire organization are actually adopting new methodologies or working in new ways or building something new. I think those success stories really resonate with our workforce. And then last but not least, listening, having empathy, supporting one another through the change, that just takes you all the way.
Perfect. And so Jennifer, back to you. What, just a closing statement about your perspective of transformation more holistically.
It is absolutely continuous, but as a human, trying to manage continuous change is so hard, right? Because it feels so daunting. So I think you have to actually utilize an episodic nature to it. I describe it as like, we've always got a mountain to climb. And when we're going to climb a new mountain, I got to get everybody rallied up. I got to get them really, really excited, because that at the front end is where all of the massive personal behavioral change needs to happen. So it might feel like you're doing more at the front end, but that's when you need the most motivation. And then you do continuous change over time. These two things have to work together, right? You have to have these like peaks and valleys to how you're going through your journey, because otherwise it feels too much like a slog. Like, yes, we need to change, but we have to recognize that all of us are humans, and humans actually don't want change. So how do you manage that experience for the people that are going to do all the incredible work to get you to the other side of the canyon, to get to the top of the mountaintop, whatever your personal metaphor is?
Perfect. So Miguel, I'm going to give you the last 45 seconds here, and then I'm going to close us off.
Sure thing. So I think about this transformation aspect as it's about sustained strategic focus, because it's so easy to get distracted. And especially when you think about many of these bets are 2, 3, even 5 to 10 years. How do you maintain that? I think of it a little bit like an episodic, like what's your favorite streaming kind of show? It is a series of episodes, and are you so excited to see the next one? And if you can carry the hearts and minds of the people who are building and creating and driving this change, I think it's super exciting. So, stay tuned for the next episode is maybe the way to think about this. And with that, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it.
I want to thank all of you. Miguel, thank you. Jennifer, thank you. Christina, thank you. Manuel, thank you. And thank you to the HITEC organization for affording us the opportunity to share our perspectives with a broader audience to help raise all of our collective game. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our host and thank everybody for their active participation. I noticed that there were some questions that came in. We weren't able to get to them. I'll make sure that I get those and we get something sent out to the organization. And so with that, I'm going to turn over the mic.
The following